around the church, and I saw so many pumpkins that it reminded me of a story about a boy named Jack. Not Owen, Jack. I got it right this time, Owen. Who wanted a brand new bike. He went to the richest man in town, Mr. Sturdivant, and asked, "Mr. Sturdivant, do you have any work I can do? I'd like to earn enough money to buy a bicycle." Mr. Sturdivant said, "No, I'm afraid I don't, Jack. I'll tell you what I can do, though. You go through my pumpkin patch and you pick out the biggest pumpkin you can find." "Well, what good will a pumpkin do me?" Jack asked. "I want a bicycle, not a pumpkin." Mr. Sturdivant replied, "You could take the pumpkin down to Mr. Crocker's market and he might buy it from you." "Okay, I guess that's better than nothing." So Jack put the pumpkin in a little red wagon and pulled it all the way to Mr. Crocker's store. "Mr. Crocker, would you like to buy this pumpkin for me?" "Sorry, Jack," he said. "I can't afford to buy any more pumpkins." "I know. I'll tell you what you could do with it. If you give me your pumpkin, I could carve a face on it and put a light in it and put it in my window. And I think everybody who walked by my window would look at it and smile. It would make them happy." Jack looked at Mr. Crocker with a frown and said, "No, I'm not interested in making people feel good. I want money to buy a bike." "Well, I can't give you any money for it," Mr. Crocker said. "Maybe Miss Pickler, the baker, would buy the pumpkin from you, make some pies." Jack turned and said, "Okay, I'll give it a try." So he entered the bakery and asked Miss Pickler if she would like to purchase his pumpkin. "No," said Miss Pickler, "but if you would give me the pumpkin, I could make some little pies and give them to the poor people in town who don't have enough to eat." Frustrated, Jack replied, "I'm not interested in feeding the people. I want money to buy a bicycle." "Well, I'm sorry, I can't help you, Jack." "Well," Miss Pickler said thoughtfully, "why don't you go ask Mr. Bullington what you can do with your pumpkin? He's the wisest man in town."
Wow.
"Well, I guess he's my last hope," Jack grumbled as he walked away, dragging the pumpkin behind him. Now, Mr. Bullington lived at the top of a large hill outside of town. Jack put the pumpkin in his little wagon, and he pulled it up the hill, which was quite a task. Jack finally made it to the top. He knocked on the front door of Mr. Bullington's house, and after a few moments, the door opened, and Jack said, "Mr. Bullington, I'm trying to sell this pumpkin to get enough money to buy a bike. What should I do?" Well, Mr. Bullington thought for a moment and said, "I'm not sure who would buy it, but you could give it to the guy at the store. He could carve a face on it, decorate it, put it in the front window of his store. And I think a smiling pumpkin would make people feel happy and feel good. I'm not interested in making people feel good. I'm not interested. I want a bike." As if he hadn't heard Jack, Mr. Bullington continued, "You could also take the pumpkin to Miss Pickler, and she could bake some pies to give to the poor." Jack replied, "I don't want to feed the poor. I want a bicycle." Well, Mr. Bullington shook his head and said, "I'm sorry, I can't help you, Jack." Then Mr. Bullington turned and shut the door. And as Jack was trying to get the pumpkin back down the hill, his hand slipped off the wagon handle, and the wagon went zooming down the hill. It hit a large rock, and it sent that pumpkin landing in the air, and it landed with a big splat. It had burst into 100 pieces. everywhere, all over the hill. Well, Jack went back home. I won't get my bike now, he said. About a year later, Jack was back on that hillside. And you know what he saw? He saw pumpkins everywhere. Real pumpkins. He realized that these had grown from the seeds of his pumpkin. And Jack saw lots of smiles as the people picked pumpkins and carved funny faces in them. He saw how happy the people were when Miss Pickler brought them fresh baked pumpkin pies. Jack decided that sharing his pumpkin with others was much better than having a bike. He learned a very important lesson that day. When we share what we have with others, we're much richer than we were if we keep everything to ourselves. So Jack had a change of heart, didn't he? He learned that sharing was better than just keeping everything to yourself. Let's go to the Lord in prayer. Dear Jesus, I just come to you this morning thanking you for these precious boys and girls. And I ask that you would help all of us to learn to share. Because when we share, we're happier people, and that's what you want us to do. These things we ask in your name. Amen.